Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to my YouTube channel, Hannah Lisa Lore, formerly the Paperback Bruncher. This is a special episode because this is a book club episode. So we're going to keep it pretty spoiler-free today, but if we've got any spoiler warnings, we'll let you know. We are discussing the Moody Readers Book Club pick for November, which is Exposure. And we've got the author joining us today. So I am so excited to introduce you to Ava, to talk about this incredible book that my mind is absolutely still reeling over, and I think yours will be too. And before we welcome her to our virtual stage here, I want to share a little bit about the author. I think it's kind of an exciting opportunity for not only us to learn more about the person behind the work, but I think it's really exciting for the author also to hear someone kind of brag about your achievements for a minute. It's one of those things where I feel like we're in this hustle culture. We're always thinking about what's next, what we have to write next, how we have to promote, what marketing, this and that. And we don't really take that step back to think about how far we've already come. So I'm going to gush about Ava for a minute, and then I will welcome her to the stage. So as I mentioned, today we're joined by an incredibly talented author whose works have touched hearts, sparked conversations all across the world. Ava is the brilliant mind behind Love Letters to the Dead, a breathtaking debut that has been translated into over 20 languages and even inspired plans for a film adaptation. Maybe we'll hear a little bit about that. Her second novel, In Search of Us, delves into themes of family, love, and identity, and has a powerful touch. And now Ava is back with Exposure, which was our book club pick here. Also, take a look at that cover. Absolutely stunning. It's a deeply moving and thought-provoking story that weaves together grief, artistic ambition, and the complexities of truth and race. Ava's background is as fascinating as her stories. She's an MFA graduate in poetry, badass, from the Iowa Writers Workshop, and even got her start in Hollywood, working for Stephen, I'm not going to pronounce his last name. We'll clarify on that one. Author of The Perks of Being a Wallflower. But most of all, Ava is a storyteller who has a gift for exploring the messy, beautiful depths of human emotion. Welcome to our virtual stage and to our book club. Hello, Ava. Woo-hoo!
I have to be like, so. You're right. That was so lovely.
It's weird because I feel like, I don't know, we're always moving ahead. We're always thinking about what's next. I know I don't look back, and sometimes my old videos pop up and I'm like, first of all, embarrassed and a little bit horrified, but also I'm like, oh, I've grown. It's really cool to see how much I've changed. I mean, I didn't start with this big library. I had like a little IKEA shelf with like 10 books. So
the library is absolutely gorgeous.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I mean, it was a rough start for the last 4 years, figuring out how to get here. But I feel like, we both established in our own ways. So it's really cool to be able to talk about it together. All right. So let's deep dive right into it. I want to know about Exposure specifically. What inspired you to write this story? Was there a particular maybe moment in culture or personal, hopefully not. After reading the book, I'm like, hopefully it's not too personal. But I would love to hear a little bit more about that. And also on the flip side of that same question, for those who haven't read the book, kind of add a little bit about it so they know exactly what you're talking about.
Okay, sounds great. I'll start with a little summary. So the story begins in 2004 with Noah, a Black high school senior, and Juliet, a white college freshman. They're two lonely souls who meet, form a connection, and after a night of drinking, they go home together. The story moves both backwards and forwards in time from there, getting to know Noah and Juliet and those closest to them as we explore some of the themes that shape their lives, like the intensity of young female friendship, the tension between artistic ambition and romantic partnership, the effects of race and class and loss and grief. It is 12 years later when Noah's done the impossible and broken through in Hollywood. He is awaiting the release of his first film, which has been a festival darling, and he and his beloved wife, Jessie, have just had their first child. Then, in the early days of their newborn daughter's life, a news story breaks. Juliet's best friend, Annie, back in LA for the first time in 12 years, has made a shocking accusation against Noah that threatens to unravel the life that he struggled to build. So the book is told in multiple perspectives, both Noah's and Juliet's, as well as Annie's and Jesse's. And at its heart, it's really about the possibility of holding space for more than one truth at the same time, and how we might empathize with multiple points of view, even opposing points of view. So I first got the idea for this book during the 2016 election cycle. Exactly. Both, it took that long to write, and it's interesting to have the book entering the world right now, which is such a parallel moment, obviously. It was sort of as social media had recently taken off as like our new kind of public square. And I think divisions in our culture were feeling, not new, but loud in a different way, I suppose. And this was like my attempt to sort of look for the human beings behind the headlines, and to like make space for conversations that might live in gray areas. I think that there's a lot of pressure right now to kind of choose sides, and things have turned very black and white, like it's this side or that, right or wrong. And there are shades of black and white in our world, certainly, but there's also a lot of gray space, and there's a lot of complexity that can kind of get edited out of some conversations. So the overarching project of the book, I guess, was to try to just make some room for that complexity, because I think that's where so much of our humanity lies.
That was such a good answer. I love talking to authors. I'm like, this is why you're a writer. It's always just so I'm like, oh, I'm a reader, not a writer. And I have so much appreciation for it. That was so thoughtful. You said the gray area, and that just like drew me back to the cover. I was like, I wonder if that's why they went with this like black and white image of sorts that actually ties in perfectly too as well. So
yeah, exactly.
I love, it's always a little bit later when I have these conversations and I'm reflecting while I'm writing my reviews that I look back at the cover and I'm like, oh, I understand now. And that is extremely clever. So did you have any like personal experiences that made you like, or let's rephrase, personal experiences that you felt kind of wove its way into the book? I know you mentioned a bit, I think in the author's note at the end of the book, about how at one stage of writing you were also becoming a new parent. So I think that kind of wove its way in there. And I was wondering if you could deep dive a little bit more on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I got the idea for the novel in 2016, and I started writing it the following year when I was pregnant with my daughter, who's now 6. So I also have an almost 3-year-old son. And so this was the book that I was writing as I was becoming a mother. Interesting. It's not necessarily like what you would think of as the quintessential new mom book. It deals with, a lot of really complex themes, but it also does deal a lot with motherhood, both with the visceral and like mind-blowing, life-changing, experience of becoming a new mom, and the intensity of that transformation in those first days, but also like motherhood in general, I think, and the effect that mothers and their presence or absence in our lives, has and can ripple, has a ripple effect throughout our whole lifetimes. I lost my own mom when I was like 22, just after I'd graduated college. And becoming a mom myself, that's a loss that never leaves, that stayed with me always. But becoming a mom myself sort of brought it back up for me in a way, and like made me think about the, profound effect that both, who she was as a mother and then her loss has continued to have on me. My father had cancer during the time and passed away actually while I was writing the book. So that experience of parental loss is obviously a clear theme in the book and was personal to me. There was a point when I was writing it where I was like, okay, I guess like at some point I'll have to change this. All of these characters have dead parents. I'll probably have to, maybe that's too much. But then as I went on, I decided that actually it wasn't, it was right. And that loss, which is so universal, almost everyone experiences at some point in their lives, was something that tied the characters together and allowed them to empathize with each other, sometimes even across battle lines.
Well, first of all, if every Disney story can have a dead parent, so can yours, right? I was like, yes,
exactly. Absolutely.
I empathize with you so much. I've also gone through loss in my own family, so I just want to say, sorry for your loss. And it makes sense why it comes across so authentically on the page, because you've lived through those moments yourself, and it's comforting to be able to read those types of stories, even though they're probably extremely hard to write. So I commend you for being able to do that and to be vulnerable, because I know that's not easy.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Of course.
Sorry for your loss too.
Thank
It's
you.
such a specific kind of loss, that like feeling of being orphaned at any age, even if you're an adult.
Yeah. It's grief never gets easier, just different.
Yeah.
Speaking of, this book does cover a lot of heavy topics. So, of course, we're talking about grief. It also talks a lot about race. As we mentioned, some artistic ambition. There's struggles of parenthood. There's relationship struggles. There's a lot of other problems. I'm trying to keep it a little bit spoiler free here. How did you approach writing these intense and interconnected themes? Was there, I know earlier you were talking about holding space. I was like, that is the wicked buzz phrase of the week. They're holding space for everything, as are we. But how did you kind of give yourself that space to write it? Maybe you had some sort of like ritual of like how to decompress, like let it out and then, give yourself some time. And how did you approach that? Because I just don't think that could be very easy. It's not easy to read, so I can't imagine writing it.
Yeah, it took a long time. This is the longest, relatively speaking, but for me, it's the longest I've ever worked on a novel or any artistic project. So partly it was the time, and I was living through, these transformations in my own life. Because my father died when my daughter was about 14, 15 months old, I really didn't have the sort of space to sprawl out in my grief like I did after I lost my mom. That grief like took up my entire 20s, more or less. And I sank into it and I worked through it in all these different ways. And I finally came out of it by writing my first book, Love Letters to the Dead. But this time it was like, I get off the plane from watching him take his last breaths to the next day being home and my mother-in-law sort of saying, who was watching her while my husband was at work, like, here's the diapers, here's a hug, see you later. And I'm like, okay, like, I guess I better make dinner. And the next day, we're up at 5 a.m., we're taking a walk, we're going to the farmer's market, and writing became the kind of space that I had to process any of that grief. I was also processing a lot of what was happening culturally at the time, and how that interacted with my own history and my own personal experiences. The artistic ambition pieces of the book were also, somewhat personal. I live in Los Angeles. My husband is a Black man and a screenwriter like Noah. Some of the early pieces of Noah and Jesse's love story. They're not us. I don't want to suggest in any way it's autobiographical, but definitely took some inspiration from, the early days of mine and Doug's love. And those were really, really actually really fun parts of the book for me to write.
That's cool that you're able to add some of your joy in there as well.
Yes. Yeah. And I don't, the book is heavy and it is dark, but it is also, at least in my mind, super romantic, like in a lot of parts, both the girlhood of Annie and Juliet and the love story between Noah and Jesse. I think there's a lot of tenderness and a lot of love, as well as like a lot of striving and hunger and ambition and all of that. And grief.
It's really refreshing to just read about these types of relationships that are so normal. As someone who reads a lot of romance, it can be, of course, it's very fun, and I'm going to continue to be reading romance till the day I die, but it is a lot of, happiness and joy for the most part. So getting to read something that takes a further look and kind of deals with some of the harder times as well is actually really nice, because I've been in my relationship for 9 years now, and it's not easy this whole time. So it's been nice to see how even their journey with throughout time, how he was wanting to propose, but he needs to get his life in order, and she just wants to marry him, damn it, and they're just such normal struggles. And it was so nice to read about and to be like, hey, that's me, or that's my sister, or that's my friend. And even with the stories of motherhood, how you were mentioning how it kind of related with you, it reminds me a lot of my friends. I'm not a mother at this point in time, but I know from their stories about how hard those early days were. And it doesn't mean that they love their child less or that they didn't want to be a mom or any of those wonderful things, but they can coexist at the same time. It can still be really hard, and you can still be super excited to be a mom. It's, not one or the other. So
exactly. Yeah. I think that it's the difficulty, especially of those early days, is hard for moms to talk about and to share with each other, because there's this idea or implication that, what you said, that somehow you're not then madly in love with your child, or that being a mom isn't the greatest joy of your life. And like you said, they can coexist. And I think that, for me, writing those parts of the book were important, because I think that difficulty can and should be talked about more. It wasn't until my daughter was in preschool and I was having my second child that I met a few other moms in the same stage of parenthood as me, also having young preschoolers and newborns, who are this is really hard. And I was like, oh, it is for you too. Okay. There's not something wrong with me. I'm not crazy. That's what it is,
Mm-hmm. Speaking of, so there's very almost, I don't want to say differing viewpoints, but for a lack of a better way to put it, that are, the core of the story is we have 4 different views, and they're all telling the same-ish story, but how they lived it. And I think it's very interesting and done in such a different way than what I'm used to reading, because if you read a historical fiction book, for example, it's often, a modern day and some way back when, but they're both moving forward. And so you kind of get to piece together as you go why they're connected and why we have the 2 timelines. There's a little bit of that happening here of the mystery of why are you telling these 4 different viewpoints and how they're going to connect, that we don't get to figure out right away. But there is some jumping around. And first of all, I have to start with a compliment, because I struggle reading from different characters' points of views and different timelines. That's not something I typically gravitate towards, because it does confuse my brain a little. Mm-hmm. But maybe it's because these characters are so starkly different from one another. But my brain did not struggle with this at all. So that is a huge testament to your writing of keeping it very clear. But I was wondering kind of what is your hope that you had for readers when they were reading the story about how they interpret those timelines and how you kind of wanted them to read? Like, what was the experience you were hoping for? And as you answer that, I'm going to turn my light on. So I promise I'm not super dark. I'm not leaving you, I promise, but I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, well, thank you for saying that. I am also somebody whose brain can struggle with like a lot of jumping around or multiple threads. I'm the person who's always going back to say like, okay, when is it? Whose story? Like I have to have everything very straight. So I did my best to make things as clear for the reader as possible, knowing that, you know, being someone who also needs that, structuring this book was like a big heavy lift. It was being worked on up until the very end. My novel I wrote before this, my second book, also had two different timelines and two different points of view. It was a mom and a daughter when they're both 17. And I wrote both of those stories separately. And then I was like, I hope they just cut together. And they did. And it was like perfect. And I was like, wow, I guess this was meant to be. It was not the same experience I had writing Exposure. It took a lot of work, trial and error, and help of a really brilliant editor. My editor, Bridie, was fantastic. And we definitely were working on that until the end, so that the story could, you know, I wanted the story to unfold with maximum momentum. I wanted it to feel like a page turner, even though it's a big book, like you said, with some heavy themes. I wanted it to be like readable. So figuring out where the story started, exactly how to pace the intercutting, because you do have to be patient with the book for a little while before before the stories finally intersect. So, you know, that my hope was that to, you know, buy the patience of the reader.
I always picture authors when they're writing books, especially ones with different timelines and different characters, to just like be like that A Beautiful Mind scene with like the papers on the wall and it's like blowing in the wind and they're connecting strings and writing all these random notes, because it's got to be hard to keep it all organized. But it paid off. It paid off. So you and your editor did a great job.
Thank you.
Of course. So speaking about the characters, is there a particular character in this book that really resonated with you, or perhaps if one didn't resonate, one that really surprised you while writing?
You know, people have asked me versions of that, like which one was my favorite, and I do really love all the characters, at least like they all feel like kids, like you can't pick a favorite, you know what I mean? And when I first started writing the book, because of the project of it, because I was writing, you know, these different versions of the truth, I had to make sure that I really believed each character fully, I think, for the book to work. So when I was getting to know the characters at the beginning, that was sort of, you know, part of what I was doing, is like falling in love with them and like listening to them and hearing them and saying and feeling like I believed them and like, yes, this is true for you, you know. So to kind of, I think, maintain the balance of the book, which really doesn't, you know, readers may sort of, and some do and some don't, kind of like choose a side. But as the author, it was important, I think, that I was with each of them fully when I was like inside of their stories.
It definitely comes across that way, because every time you switch reading to a new character, I start to like buy into what they're saying. And I'm like, no, but this is probably what happened. But this is what happened. And I'm like, wait, I had to like put the book down for a minute and just kind of like stew. And I was like, what do I think though? Like, what do I feel? Because they're so convincing, because it's their truth. So it comes across, I don't know, very believable. So well done. So we mentioned earlier in your bio that you have an MFA in poetry. So for those unfamiliar, can you explain what that means? And then kind of talk about how, if that influenced your writing for this particular book.
Yeah. So an MFA is like a type of graduate school, but it usually only lasts 2 years, and it's in something artistic. You can do it for writing, and they also have different MFAs in like art or film or things like that. But I got mine in poetry. That was the kind of writing I loved. That was what I did in college. I actually, after college, I was going to apply to PhD programs. And then after my mom died, I sort of completely like lost interest in that. The only thing I could still do was write, and poetry felt like, like this language in which I could express grief where I couldn't express it in regular language. So I applied to poetry MFAs, and I ended up at Iowa, which was a really magical experience that I think I was slightly too young and to fully appreciate at the time, although I did love it. Because my background is in poetry, and then I actually started to try to learn screenwriting before I even started working on my first novel. It's definitely, having poetry be my first love has influenced my relationship to language, I think.
Mm-hmm.
You really are trained to to feel the weight of every single word in a poem. And I think I've carried some of that with me, as well as I'm always looking for the musicality in language, I think, because of my background in poetry. Even when I'm writing prose, I'm really interested in the way it sounds. I can't repeat words unless it's unless it's intentional, unless it's like a bell. But if it's clanging, then I can't. I'm very when I'm editing the work, some of what I'm doing is hearing it, hearing the music of it.
It makes so much more sense, connecting these pieces of your background, because there is a brief section of the book where Juliet has a poem that was a little snippet of. And sometimes when authors try, I'm not going to name names because I'm not a hater, but they try to include these types of snippets in their books. Maybe it's a song that someone wrote or a poem or these types of things. And because it's not quite their forte, it will take you right out of the novel. Whereas this one just took you more in, because it felt like you got a little bit of Juliet. And even thinking about her mother's profession of photography, and the way that you described her photography, and the way that she viewed things. I mean, her controversial photography, we should say, but the way that she, viewed her art and her eye behind the lens. And I feel like even the way you described her career was from such a creative perspective that it just, all these dots are connecting, and it just makes perfect sense. Very cool. So we talked a little bit about the kind of journey that you wanted the readers to go on while, reading exposure, but was there a particular kind of takeaway that you were hoping for once they finished the book? Or maybe if you don't have one for yourself, is there something that, now that it's been out for a minute, that people are telling you is their takeaway that really, just lights you up inside and makes you feel good?
Yeah, I think that, one of the happy things of having the book come out is I think many readers are taking from it what I hoped they would, which is this, really it's a call for empathy, and for empathy even for people who have very different points of view than we do. In no way in writing the book am I asking anyone to give up their own, moral convictions. The opposite. What I'm trying to do is just to, make space to still recognize the humanity of people who have a different truth than we do. One of the things that, I didn't necessarily think about this explicitly when I was writing the book, but I've thought a lot about it leading up to the release of the book is this idea of, in that need for empathy, how much the nervous system can actually be involved in that. So like a lot of times when we go online to have certain conversations, our nervous systems are in this state of fight or flight because we feel like we're fighting for our beliefs, or even our safety, or the safety of the people we love. And from that point of view, our bodies, our vision narrows, like our perspective. We have tunnel vision, both literally and cognitively. That's one of the ways that our body protects us. So in that state of fight or flight, it's really hard to, take in somebody else's point of view. I think that one of the things that reading can do, for me, one of the things reading can do is be an opportunity to slow down, shift into a different register, and, allow multiple perspectives to come in to create. Reading creates room for empathy, I think, is a much shorter and more concise way of the long-winded thing I just said. And I guess that was my, my hope for the book.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of the title, I was curious to know, I loved a little behind the scenes moment. So I like to dig into what the reader wouldn't know even after reading the book. Did you choose the title? Did you always know that was going to be the title? Why exposure? Because I feel like that is the first thing that drew me to pick up the book, was the title. I felt like the word exposure can be very triggering, but also very polarizing. For me as a content creator, I hate the word exposure because people in my context are usually using it for wanting free labor. Exposure, no thank you. But I was so curious because it can be taken in so many ways. So that was the first mystery of the book for me, exposure to what? So yes, why exposure?
I wish I could say that was my title, but it was not. I thought of the title for my first book, Love Letters to the Dead, before I ever started writing it. And it was the perfect title for the book. I have not had that experience again since with anything else I've worked on. So it was after the book that was finished and my agent and I were, getting ready to send it out. I'd gone through multiple titles that he thought of it. He sent me he thought of it and said it as a side note. He actually had a different title that he was trying to sell me on. And I was like, no, that one. I love one word titles. I wanted something that felt bold, like I think the book is, and that had multiple meanings that could cover, the book is so expansive. It's hard to find one title that can touch on everything, but I think this came close. The exposure relates to the photography elements of the book, like you said, which is this, important thread in there, and photography as it ties to image and the way we're seen, and the way we're seen privately, and the way we're seen publicly. Exposure, like a story being uncovered or a story being broken, exposure, like revealing oneself. So there's all of these different sort of multi-layered meanings to it, I hope. And the cover was followed from it, I think. Zibby Books is super collaborative with their covers in a way I haven't experienced before, but they had me do a whole Pinterest board before we even found the cover designer. And I had a lot of those types of black and white images, speaking to this gray area, but then and then I also had a lot of pop art images. And I couldn't just I liked both vibes for the book, this bright, loud, okay, we're doing this, we're talking about this, here it is. And then this sort of, nuanced, mysterious gray area sort of space. So the designer really put them both together beautifully. The first version of the cover, though, just had the woman's face. And I felt it was really important we add the male face as well to represent like the different points of view. Some people see it right away, some people don't, which is interesting.
Oh, it took me forever. At first, I just thought it was movement, you know?
Yeah, like in shape.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
From far away, you really can't.
But you've got to get in there.
Close, which is kind of good for the book, right? Like you always have to look closer.
I feel like Noah would appreciate it.
Yeah, I think so.
Also, that's a fun little side note to learn about Zibby's books and how their team works, because I feel like every experience I've had with them so far has been so wonderful and positive, and it's cool to hear that they're really collaborative on the cover design as well.
Yeah,
I have a huge fondness for their team.
They're wonderful, and their author-friendly brand is not just talk; it's really, really real in how they do things.
I mean, they're the ones who told me to read your book, so that's why we're here.
Well, thank you to them.
All right, so I do love to play a game with every single author. I think it's just kind of a fun way to get to know them as a human and to connect with them in a different way. So we're going to play 4 truths and 1 lie, since this book is all about some truths, but maybe there's a lie in there or a stretch of the truth. So as we play this game, if anyone in the audience has any questions for Ava, let me know in the comments, because I will pull those at the end if we've got them. But if you don't, that's all right. I've got it handled. Don't feel stressed. But I do want to make sure if you have a question that we give some time for that. All right. So 4 truths, 1 lie. You're going to share 5 statements about your life or your writing process, and 1 will be false, and me and the chat, if they like, are going to try to guess which one's the lie.
All right.
I'm like, all right, let me see how that goes.
Like writing related. Okay. I make multiple playlists for every book I'm working on. I can write anywhere: planes, ballet classes, beds, crowded cafes. I live 2 doors down from the house on Franklin Avenue in LA where Joan Didion once lived. I used to live in Kurt Vonnegut's old farmhouse. I don't have a lot of ideas for books or stories. I usually just have 1 idea at the time, the one I'm working on. Okay.
I have 2 guesses for no particular reason, of which I think might be the lie, so I need to narrow it down. I'm thinking it could be the writing anywhere, but that is also a little bit of a self-insert because I can't read anywhere. I get very distracted. So I'm like, maybe we're alike. I think the house ones are correct. Oh, let me think. What was the last one again?
I don't have a lot of ideas for books or stories. I usually have just 1 good idea at a time, the one I'm working on.
I feel like that could be true. Like, I feel like you'd be someone who just hones in, you know? I see this. I feel like you'd focus and just give it your all. I could be wrong. I'm just speculating here. Okay. Yeah, we'll go with my gut answer. The second one is the lie.
So the lie is the 2 doors down from Joan Didion's house.
Is that right? I don't know.
I'm reading that book right now. The Didion and Babbitt's book, which is fantastic. I recommend. So that was just wish fulfillment. But yeah, I did not used to be able to write anywhere. But since having children, I've really developed that skill.
You're like, I need my time whenever I can have it.
You get it where you can. I would be writing on the plane when I'd be going back and forth to see my dad. I'd be taking my computer to her ballet classes that I take her after school while I was editing the book and just getting it in. But I'm very pleased that I fooled you because I worked hard on those.
I know that's got to be in the delivery, but you delivered them well. Also an actress. Maybe LA is rubbing off on you.
Perhaps.
That's why those ones were so hard, because I feel like every single time I've gone to LA, I usually go a couple times a year. For like book events now, I've been going a little bit more. But I feel like every single time I go, there's some bizarre, just like only could happen in LA type thing. And
Totally.
I was like, they all could be true. I
It
didn't.
absolutely could have been true. Yeah. The Kurt Vonnegut one is real. That was in Iowa. The house I lived in was like this historic farmhouse that used to be his.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
On one of my last experiences, I got to go to like a book to screen adaptation premiere. And so I was like, I don't know how to do makeup. I'm going to hire someone. Like, I'm going to be fancy for once. And so I booked a makeup artist who was like super well credited. And she had a lot of reviews. So I probably shouldn't have gone to her house, but like it seemed safe at the time. So I went to her house. She did a wonderful job. She was great. But as I was leaving, I asked if I could use her bathroom. And she was like, yeah, of course, it's right there. And so I go into their hall bathroom and I'm peeing. And it's like one of those small bathrooms. And every inch of the wall is covered in Game of Thrones like pictures from like premiere. But like it's like the same man with like everyone in the cast, like everyone ever. But this one same man. I'm like, oh, this is his house, I guess. And I'm always just like that person. I don't know. I love a dad joke. I'm never quiet. I come out of the bathroom and I was like, oh, you guys really love Game of Thrones, huh? Like, I don't know why I said it like that. And she just like chuckles and she was like, yeah, like my husband's the director or something like that. And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
Just having Harrington every day. Like, I don't know what your lives are, but this is cool. This is very cool.
Very LA. Trying to capture like that the LA-ness in the book was like one of the most fun parts of writing it. Like all of Noah's crazy internships and jobs he does. And, you know, some of them were like inspired by my early days in LA. I came like so brand new with like no like clue as to like what's legitimate and what's not, like just trying to find a way to make it, like down to do whatever, driving to like crazy parts of the city to like help kids with college essays, and then like working for free, picking up fancy dog food, and like I don't know, it's worth it. It all sort of, you know, stayed with me.
Mm-hmm. There's definitely even that element too that people talk about a lot of being called this like overnight success. So Noah, people probably would call him that in the headlines, whereas behind the scenes, he's working for 10 years, grinding it out, trying to get there. So I felt like that also came across like, oh, yep, this is what we hear about. Like, this is the life of a writer, you know, or someone in Hollywood in general, even.
Yeah, a lot of people here will say, like, you know, the people who succeed really are the ones who can stick it out the longest, which is, you know, somewhat true. Somewhat true.
You have to have a
feeling that you could like walk through a revolving door and become somebody else, like on the other side, is such a part of like the feeling of the city, and especially of being new to the city, of like, there's just so much possibility, and it all feels as if it's like almost within reach.
Yeah, they're right there. You just saw them at lunch.
Exactly. It's right there. You just waited on their table.
So we have to ask the age-old question of what you're working on now or what's next. And if there isn't an answer to that, kind of what do you want the people to know? Maybe you're really fun on Instagram, or, you know, how do they keep up with you and what should they look forward to?
Well, I am working on a new adult novel that's sort of goes back to some of the motherhood themes we were talking about. It's so far it's like really fun to work on, but it's still in the early stages. So I'll keep that one mostly under wraps. I'm also doing a graphic novel of my first book, of Love Letters to the Dead, which sort of fell out of the sky, but seems like it's going to be a really fun project to work on. I still have a lot of readers who get in touch with me about that book. And so it's going to be nice to revisit that story in another context. I don't know if I'm fun on Instagram, but I'm trying. It's like not
really hard.
I'm so naturally kind of like a private person, but part of being an author is like, being in the world. So I've been making an effort to be in the world, and I'd love for anyone to join me. I do really like talking to people on Instagram. You can always DM me.
That was your self-insert of the book when Jessie was like, I guess I'm an author. I have to be online now.
Yes. Absolutely. But like, there's so much to discover, right? I love like being on it. I love, finding what other people are doing and getting inspiration and getting reading inspiration and everything. I just like the hurdle for me is sharing myself, and I'm starting to overcome that.
Everyone always asks me like how I do it, and they're like, how do you show up and show your face? And I'm like, honestly, practice. And some days you still don't want to, and you do it anyways. It's like anything else. Like at this point for me, it is a job, so I kind of have to. I don't really have a choice, but also if I want to succeed and I want to grow, it's something I have to also show up for. And the way I like to think about it is, yes, there's all that pressure there, but the people that you connect with most authentically online, that you feel like you really like get to know and enjoy their content and like who they are as a human, no matter, what niche they're in, are the people who show themselves. It's not just maybe hands or pretty pictures. Those things are great too, but being able to actually get a sense of who the person is always going to be your best.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's something about like, part of being an author is promoting a book online. That's like sort of part of the job, but it made me feel like, okay, but I can't just like say the same sort of like, top level, like, buy this book, please. Like, I have to say something real for this to like, have any kind of, I don't know. I just didn't want to do it in a way that felt fake. It did inspire me to like start exploring what that feels like. I admire you very much. And it's right. You're right. Like, it is probably the same as writing. You don't always want to sit down and write. Like, you don't want to do it. You show up because that's your work.
Your own avenue of exposure, if you will.
Yes, exactly.
All right. So my last question for you is not on the predetermined list. So I'm giving it to you on the fly. It should be very easy, hopefully. But at the end of the day, I mentioned I'm not a writer. I am just a huge book lover, a huge reader. So I love to hear from authors books that they always recommend or books that they really love. So it cannot be something you wrote. This is anyone else wrote but you. And then my little follow-up challenge is you can mention a few. You don't have to pick just one, but I have to choose just one of these books, and I will request it at my local library and I will read it. So,
oh, wow. That's so fun.
I really enjoy, seeing a different side of authors and seeing who they love and who they admire and the work that, they're inspired by. So it's a fun question to ask.
Okay, well, the first few that came to mind that are kind of books that I go back to as a writer to like study the craft of are Welcome to the Goon Squad by Jennifer Egan. This Is How You Lose Her by Junot Diaz, and Homegoing.
Okay, I have two of the three. I have the second two, and I haven't read them. So this is great for me. I was like, I hope she picks something I have on these times back here because I have so much to read. So that's even better. I don't have to go to the library, which I usually do. So.
Salvage the Bones also by Jesmyn Ward. I have to add that. That's another like deeply beautiful.
Your poetry and
some of them are light. I'm not a light. I like intense books, which all of those are.
No, it's good for me. This is why I love book clubs and I love asking people for recommendations, because how you're mentioning earlier, through reading, you can gain so much empathy, but you also just get to read so much outside of your norm. You get to, experience a new world. You get to experience new characters, how different people live their lives. It's really cool. It's very special. All right, so that is the end of our stream here. I want to remind everyone that all of the links that you should probably ever need for Ava are down below. So her Instagram, this book on Goodreads, on Storygraph, multiple places where to buy it, how to join our book club, all of that is down below because I like to make life easy for everybody. So go ahead and click all those links. Make sure to follow Ava. And, if you don't have this book, go ahead and request it from your local libraries. I don't know if you know this, but most libraries actually let you request several books per month to be added to their library. My library actually would let me request 30 a month, which is absolutely bonkers. I've never requested 30 books a month, but so that's something I think a lot of people don't know. They look online, they're like, my library doesn't have it, oh darn. But if you do request that they add it to their library, they almost always say yes. And usually they give you first dibs on requesting it too, which is very special. So go ahead, request it, shop it, all of that wonderful stuff.
That's a great way to not have to. Hardcover books are really expensive. That's a great way to. It's a great tool. Thanks for that.
It's almost like I've been doing this for 4 years. I know some hot tips for you. All right. Well, this is a goodbye for now, not a goodbye for forever, because once you are in my book club fold, I'm forever tagging you in posts and bugging you in your DMs. So you are not rid of me yet, but I just wanted to give you a huge thank you for being here today, for sharing space. There it is again, with the book club. And of course, for just writing such a thoughtful, thought-provoking, and impactful story. It's one of the reads of my 2024 that I will be thinking about for a long while. So it was incredibly special, and I just feel honored to get to share some time with you today.
I feel honored too. Thank you, Hannah.
Of course. And thank you everyone for joining and for joining in the future and watching the replay. And we appreciate you so much. Happy reading all, and we will talk to you soon and see you on the internet. Bye.